There are overcrowding of the patients in the hospital, the unsanitary conditions of the hospital, the inadequate infrastructure, limited COVID testing centers, and understaffed and underfunded hospitals are some of the major challenges that need to be taken care of in a very right way. So, in this 7 days webinar series, our guest speakers will be highlighting all these challenges from the different parts of the country and how they are addressing them and how their healthcare delivery systems are managing it. So, without any further ado, we will start today's session on the different aspects of COVID-19. So I would like to request all the participants, if you are having any questions, so please don't ask in between. You can write or you can just type your questions in the chat box, and we will, if the time allows, we will be addressing them. So the today's session, which is on the different aspects of COVID-19, it will be dealt by our four esteemed guests, speakers, Ms. Kumkum Ghosh. She is Patron and Deputy General Manager, Nursing Education and Quality PAN, Max Healthcare Limited. Ms. Kusum Roy, Faculty, Amity College of Nursing, Amity University, Haryana. Ms. Amandeep Kaur, she is Assistant Professor of Amity College of Nursing, Amity University, Haryana. And Mr. Robin J. Bhatti, Deputy Nursing Superintendent, Maharishi Markandeshwar Hospital, Mulana, Ambala. I cordially invite you all for the today's session. So, to request with the first session, I may call upon Ms. Amandeep Kaur for briefing the participants with the COVID-19, a rational update globally. Ms. Amandeep Kaur is currently working as Assistant Professor in Amity College of Nursing, Haryana. She is post-graduated in Medical Surgical Nursing, Neurosciences from AIIMS, Delhi. She has got a blend of 10 years of experience in teaching and clinical setting and research. She is a certified BLS and ACLS provider and basic first aid trainer. She has organized various national and national level workshops and conferences and had been the source of a resource person in many of the conferences. She has many research publications in various reputed journals and scientific paper presentations in various national and international conferences. She is also a lifetime member of TNAI and Society of Indian Neuro Nurses and is reviewer in CBS Publisher and content developer in CBS Nursing. Ms. Amandeep, please, we can start with the presentation. You can start with the presentation. Your mic is mute. Please unmute it.
Is it, am I audible now?
Yes, yes. Yes, you can proceed now.
Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Baker, for the introduction. So, in today's 1-hour lecture, you will be updated on the various aspects of COVID-19. And in next 10 minutes, I'll be talking about the origin, epidemiology, and mode of transmission, pathogenesis, and clinical manifestation of COVID-19. So, it's a lot to cover in a short span of time. So, I'll start with COVID-19. What is COVID-19? Can you see my screen, all of you?
Yes, we are able to see it.
Okay, thank you. So what is COVID-19? COVID-19, it is a disease and it's a short form of coronavirus 2019. So coronavirus disease is a highly infectious disease caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, which belongs to a coronaviridae family. So it's not a new viruses, coronaviruses, so they have caused illnesses in the previous years also. So coronaviruses, they are a large family of viruses found in animals as well as humans earlier also, and they range illness from common cold to severe disease like pneumonia, ARDS, and Middle East respiratory syndrome, that is MERS coronavirus, which was caused by MERS coronavirus in 2012. And there was an endemic in Saudi Arabia, which was reported in 2012, just a decade ago. And also SARS, you might have heard, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which was caused by SARS coronavirus in 2002. So earlier also coronaviruses used to cause illnesses, but this new strain, that is the novel coronavirus which caused COVID-19, it is a new strain, and now it has been renamed as SARS coronavirus 2 because it has lot of homology with SARS coronavirus 1. So it originated in Wuhan city of Hubei province in China, and this table, it depicts the how the pandemic has unfold and it has initiated. So the first case of pneumonia of unknown cause was reported in Wuhan city of China on December 1st, 2019. Later, the China notifies WHO of pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan at the end of the December. On 7th January 2020, the Chinese authority, they found this novel coronavirus and they named it as novel coronavirus, which later on 11 February 2020 was named as COVID-19 by WHO. So WHO has declared COVID-19 as public health emergency of international concern on January 30th. So if we talk about this virus, SARS coronavirus 2, so this virus, why it is known as corona? Because it has crown-like spikes on the outer surface. So there are, as you can see in the figure, there are spike proteins on the bilayer lipid membrane. Yeah.
The slides are not visible.
It's not visible?
Not yet.
Hello, it's Parag here, ma'am.
Participants, please mute your mics.
Were they visible previously? Like the first slide, were you able to see? First two slides I have covered.
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Now is it visible?
Yes, yes, it is visible now.
Okay. So this slide shows the diagram of SARS coronavirus 2. So it has crown-like spikes. That's why the name comes coronavirus, because there are spikes on the surface, and this virus is very minute in size. It's just 65 to 125 nanometer in diameter, but they are heavy as compared to other viruses, so they cannot travel very far and drop down to the ground. So here comes the concept of social distancing. The genetic material is single-stranded RNA. Now, if I talk about the epidemiology, so total confirmed cases all over the globe are 8,061,550 cases, and this is latest. I have taken the data, and total deaths over time is 4,40,290 deaths. And in this table, you can see the top 10 affected countries, and you can see that India has jumped to the 4th rank with the total cases. Now, according to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the total cases, confirmed cases in India are 3,66,946. The first case of COVID-19 in India was reported on 30th January 2020. And now the total deaths over time is just 12,237. So the worst affected state is Maharashtra in India. Now, if I talk about the mode of transmission, so earlier this virus was found in animals only, and the transmission is basically the zoonotic transmission. What is zoonotic? Zoonotic means the virus has jumped from the animal to the human being to infect the first person, and later on the human-to-human transmission occurred between the humans through close contact, through coughing, sneezing, and droplet transmission and contact transmission. So the primary host was found to be bat, and the intermediate host is unknown. So it does. The scientists, they are still searching. They are not like confirmed how the virus has jumped from the primary reservoir, that is the bat, and to the human. So whether the humans have consumed the raw infected bat or there was a direct contact, so that is unknown, and even the intermediate host is also unknown. So now, once the virus has jumped from the bat to the humans, now the human to human transmission is occurring through droplet, aerosols, and fomites. So droplets, they are the bigger molecules, bigger size droplets, so which is when a person cough, when an infected person cough or sneezes, so they exposed to droplets. So the droplets, they fall on the ground because they are heavy, whereas the aerosols, they are lesser in size, smaller in size, just less than 5 micrometers. So they don't drop just when the person cough or sneezes, they remain suspended in the air. So airborne transmission is also come into place here. Also, when the droplets, they fall on the ground or on the surfaces, they contaminate the surfaces. So here is the fomites. So the infected surfaces, they become the source of infection. So fecal-oral transplacenta routes are still in question. Researches are going on. It is not confirmed whether the virus can travel from mother to child or through the fecal-oral route. If we talk about the incubation period, so incubation period is 2 to 14 days. Median is 5 days. So a person once gets infected, it takes usually 5 days, median 5 days to show the symptoms. Next is how contagious is COVID-19. So this can be better understood by R naught, that is the basic reproduction number. So what is R naught? It is the average number of people one infected person can further infect. So for higher, more the R naught number, higher is the infectivity rate. So for COVID-19, R naught ranges from 2.6 to 4.71. So this data I have taken from various researches, and R naught is not stagnant or constant. It keeps on changing because it depends upon the how the people are following the preventive strategies. So like India has still managed to keep the R naught at 1.22. But still, if we compare with other diseases, the R naught is more than SARS and it is lesser than the MERS. And if we talk about the fatality rate, so COVID-19 looks a lot closer to the seasonal flu, and the fatality rate still is less than SARS. So SARS fatality rate was found to be 10%, whereas for COVID-19, the fatality rate is just 3.4%. Yes, it is more than seasonal flu, but it is fatal. Now, let's see what are the risk population. So any person who comes in close contact with the infected individual is at risk of developing the infection. So all the older people, more than 70 years of age, people with comorbidities like diabetes, lung diseases, heart diseases, cancer, etc., are at risk of developing this infection. Also, healthcare professionals who come in contact with a confirmed case, they are also at risk of developing this infection. Now let's understand what is the pathogenesis of COVID-19. Pathogenesis means how the virus infects the human body. So if we see here, there are orifices. So how the virus enters the human body, it enters through orifices, that is through the nose, through mouth, and through the eyes. So these are the main orifices through which the virus can enter into the human body, and it can travel down the airway to infect the alveoli of the lungs. So once the virus reaches the lung, it can there can be inflammation reaction that starts because the immune system gets triggered, and there is the macrophages, they travel to the inflammatory side. So once the macrophages reaches to the inflammation side, it releases cytokines. So there is cytokine storm, due to which the patient alveoli, they have fluid accumulation. So why there is fluid accumulation? Because it infects the type 2 cells, type 2 alveolar cells of the alveoli. So these type 2 cells, they make surfactant. So surfactant we all know. So it prevents the alveoli to collapse. So because the surfactant is decreased because of fluid accumulation, the alveoli collapse. And very important here is that all the alveolus are in different state in COVID-19. So some are in severe state, some are in moderate, some are just infected, or some alveoli are healthy, due to which the patient with COVID-19 has a heterogeneous lung, because the all alveoli are in different state. Now, because of the cytokine storm, there is vasodilation, due to which the BP falls. Also, on the other hand, the coagulation cascade is going on, due to which there is formation of microcirculatory clots. Now, these clots travel to different parts of the body, and they block the blood flow, which leads to tissue hyperperfusion, and which can lead to again hypotension and septic shock, or it can lead to multi-organ failure in the patient. So this is the clinical syndrome which is associated with COVID-19. So the patient can develop mild to severe pneumonia. Patient can also present with ARDS, sepsis and septic shock, or patient can have acute kidney or cardiac injury and multi-organ function failure because of the pathogenesis I just explained. I hope I am not that fast and all are getting me.
Yes, we are able to grasp.
Okay. So next is the clinical features. So this data I have taken from Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, Oxford University, and the last it was updated on 29th March. So they have done 6 systematic reviews, and they have found that patient with COVID-19, they present with most common symptom was fever. So 88.4% of patients who are severely ill, they present with fever. Then the next symptom was cough, followed by fatigue, dyspnea, sputum production, shortness of breath, myalgia, that is muscle pain, chills, dizziness, headache, sore throat, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and nasal congestion. So these were the clinical feature, but the most common symptoms were fever, fever and cough, dry cough. And hemoptysis and conjunctivitis were also seen in patient infected with COVID-19. Recent studies have also shown that the patient also present with, some patient also present with anosmia, that is loss of smell. So these are the clinical manifestation. If we talk about the spectrum of disease, so patient, 80% of the patient, they experience just mild or uncomplicated illness. Mild illness means just fever or headache or cough and nausea, vomiting. 15% they develop severe disease and they require hospitalization, oxygen support. And only 5% requires admission to ICU. Only 5% are severely ill or critical and they require ICU. So this is all about the basics of COVID-19, which I was supposed to.
Hello, Ms. Avandeep, are you done with the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have finished the presentation.
Okay. So thank you so much, Ms. Amandeep Kaur, for in such a short span of time, you were able to tell very precisely about the various aspects like sign and symptoms, the mode of transmission, the epidemiology, and the statistics around the globe. So before proceeding further with the session, I would like to invite our respected nursing superintendent, ma'am, Ms. Praveen Rani. She has just joined the meeting. So I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to ma'am, and I warmly welcome you, ma'am. And you have given us this opportunity to, and you have allowed the organizers to organize this webinar. So we welcome you on the behalf of all the participants, all the organizers. So we will move further to the next session. The next session is on the science of the diagnosis and the treatment of COVID-19. So I would like to welcome Ms. Kusum Roy for discussion on the diagnosis of COVID-19. So Ms. Kusum Roy is currently associated with Amity University, Haryana, and is working as a faculty in the Amity College of Nursing. She has completed her master's in nursing with the specialty in the medical surgical nursing from Jamia Hamdard. She is a lifetime member of many nursing professional organizations and associations. She has received several scholarships and financial aids for documentation and specialization courses offered by Johns Hopkins University, University of Minnesota, Yale University, University of Toronto, University of Michigan, and she has also organized many national and international workshops and conferences and has brought research publications in various national and international journals. He is currently also meticulously working with several organizations for the awareness of COVID-19. So, Ms. Kusum Roy, now please you can address the participants. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Rebecca ma'am, for a lovely introduction. So today I will be presenting about the diagnosis of COVID-19. So I'm sharing my screen. Participants, kindly mute your mics. Otherwise, we have to do it forcefully.
Also, somebody is presenting. I think Preeti Chauhan is presenting her. She has shared the screen. Please
And do
stop
not share your screen. Only speakers can share their screen. If you will do like this, then forcefully we have to remove you.
Now Rubika Pradhan is presenting. So please stop sharing your screen. Stop presenting your screen.
Ms. Rubika Pradhan, please stop sharing your screen.
Is it visible, Rebecca ma'am?
Yeah, we are able to see. Yes, yes.
Wait a minute. So diagnosis, is it full screen or half screen, ma'am?
It's full screen.
Full screen. Okay. Okay. Then I'm going to cover about diagnostic criteria. So firstly, collection of sample. There are two types of sample, preferred sample and alternate sample. In preferred sample, we are taking throat and nasal swab in the viral transport media. Viral transport media we are using for taking the sample of COVID-19 patients, and it is transported in cold chain thereafter. In the alternate, we are using nasopharyngeal swab, BAL or endotracheal aspirate, which has to be mixed with the viral transport medium and transported in the cold chain. And as we all know, the gold standard test for COVID-19 till now is reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. It is a test or method of testing by taking a nasal or throat swab from a patient, which involves extracting ribonucleic acid or RNA, which is the genetic material of the virus. Now there are two ways, or like first is lower respiratory tract sample and the other is upper respiratory tract sample. In lower respiratory tract sample, we are taking bronchoalveolar lavage, tracheal aspirate, sputum. We are collecting 2 to 3 ml of the sample into a sterile, leak-proof screw cap sputum collection cup or sterile dry container. Especially patients who are ventilated, we are collecting bronchoalveolar lavage from them. And the other one is upper respiratory tract. In this, we are taking two types of sample, nasopharyngeal swab and oropharyngeal swab, which I will be discussing in my further slides. First is nasopharyngeal swabs. In this is a procedure how we are going to take the nasopharyngeal swab from a COVID-19 suspected patient. The patient should be alert and cooperative. Allow them to first blow their nose. Second, make patient sit in comfortable position in hand. If necessary, lean the patient's head against the wall and to minimize these jerky movements. Thereafter, stand slightly offset from the patient to avoid the risk of contamination in case of sudden cough or sneeze. Then, hold the swab like a pen between the thumb, index and middle fingers. As picture is depicting, we have to hold the swab like a pen between the thumb, index and middle fingers. Maintain a loose grip that allows the swab to accommodate any resistance encountered during sample collection to reduce the risk of injury. Then start by inserting the swab horizontally into the left or right nostril carefully. Advance the swab while maintaining a course that is close to both the septum and the floor of the nose, parallel to the palate. Do not advance the swab upward, but instead straight back until when resistance is felt as the swab reaches the posterior nasopharynx. Leave the swab at this step for a few seconds while gently wiping the wall, eye, twisting the shaft. Thereafter, slowly and gently remove the swab and immediately insert the swab into the sample collection tube, which may contain 2 to 3 ml of viral transport media, which I have already discussed. We are collecting the sample of COVID-19 patient in viral transport media. Then after putting inside, we have to cut off the applicator tip. The other way is oropharyngeal swab. In this procedure, same thing we are doing, informing the patient that it might be uncomfortable for some time and may trigger a gag reflex because we are going inside the oral cavity, so it may trigger gag reflex. Ask the patient to open their mouth wide, protrude their tongue forward and say ah. Depress the patient's tongue using a tongue depressor and gently insert the swab into the oral cavity without touching the lips, teeth, tongue, hard palate or soft palate. Collect the sample from the back wall of the throat. Twist the swab gently but thoroughly, sampling the oropharyngeal wall. Remove the oropharyngeal swab. Thereafter, insert it into the tube of universal transport medium. We are inserting the sample of oropharyngeal swab in the universal transport medium, ensuring that swab tip is fully submerged into the liquid of the tube and cut off the applicator tip. Thereafter, in both the samples, we have to clearly label the patient's name, date of birth, unique identification number, appropriately pack and transport it into the lab. Then there is one more sample in which both the samples are combined, nasal and throat. The way of taking the sample is similar as I have already discussed. The thing is we are keeping both the samples together. Now there are some temperature, some guidelines which is given by WHO which we have to follow whenever we are collecting the samples. For nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal swab, we have to maintain a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius when we are transporting to laboratory, and we should use Dacron or polyester flogged swabs only, because if we are using any other kind of swab, it may alter the result or it may inactivate the virus, and the polymerase chain reaction results will be inhibited, and it should be stored. If we are storing it for more than 5 days, then at minus 70 degrees Celsius. If less than 5 days, then 4 degrees Celsius. Then for bronchoalveolar lavage, we are collecting it in sterile container. And temperature for transportation to laboratory is 4 degrees Celsius. If we are keeping it for more than 48 hours, then minus 70 degrees Celsius, and less than or equal to 48 hours, 4 degrees Celsius. Third one is tracheal aspirate, nasopharyngeal aspirate, and nasal wash. We are collecting it in the sterile container. Same 4 degrees Celsius for transportation in the laboratory, and same temperature for the storage also. Sputum, same container, same temperature for the transportation to the laboratory, and same for the storage also. Similarly, the other one is tissue from biopsy or autopsy, including from lung. This we are containing in the sterile container with saline, because this is the biopsy or autopsy tissue. That is why temperature is 4 degrees Celsius for transportation to the laboratory, and storage, if more than 24 hours, then minus 70 degrees Celsius. If less than 24 hours, then 4 degrees Celsius. Serum samples, 2 samples, acute and convalescent sample. In this, we are collecting 3 to 5 ml of whole blood and transporting into laboratory at 4 degrees Celsius on 2 separate tubes. If we are storing it for more than 5 days, 70 degrees, same as above. And if less than 5 days, then 4 degrees Celsius. Then there are some rapid diagnostic tests also, which we have heard also. First is rapid diagnostic test based on antigen detection. And the second one is rapid diagnostic test based on host antibody detection. On the basis of antigen detection, we are checking the presence of proteins, antigens expressed by the COVID-19 virus if we, whenever we are collecting the sample from the respiratory tract of a person. If the target antigen is present in sufficient concentrations in the sample, it will bind to the specific antibodies, which is fixed already in the paper strip enclosed in a plastic casing, and generate a visually detectable signal, typically within 30 minutes. You have heard that rapid diagnostic tests are giving results within 30 minutes, so early. The other one is antibody detection test. The antibody detection test looks for the presence of antibodies, which are specific proteins made in response to infections. Antibodies are detected in the blood of people who are tested after infection. They show an immune response to the infection. Antibody test results are especially important for detecting previous infections in people who had few or no symptoms. But the sensitivity of this test is expected to vary. That is why we are not using this as a diagnostic criteria. And the sensitivity rate is 34% to 80%, and WHO also does not recommend it for the diagnosis of COVID-19. Similarly, ICMR also does not recommend it. So we are not using it for the diagnosis of COVID-19. The next one is blood investigations. There are some other blood investigations. As we all know that if we are sending the sample of COVID-19 suspected patient for RT-PCR, it may take 2 to 3 days for the results to come out. So during that duration, we can conduct some other tests, we can monitor some other tests so that we can know, or we can suspect, or we can be aware of that it could be COVID-19. For example, first is complete blood count. It will rule out lymphopenia, leukopenia, and leukocytosis. Second one is comprehensive metabolic panel. It is a blood test that gives information about the body's fluid balance, levels of electrolyte like sodium, potassium, and how well the kidneys and liver are perfusing. So LFT will be ALT in LFT, ALT will be increased, AST will be increased, and bilirubin will be increased. So it is indicating that there is inappropriate perfusion to the liver. Similarly, in KFT also, inappropriate perfusion to the kidneys will be there, which is indicated by increased blood urea nitrogen, creatinine. And in heart, troponin T and I may also increase, which refers to the damage of myocardium. Now, there are some inflammatory markers also, like elevated CRP, C-reactive protein, elevated ESR, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, the infection rate will be increased. Elevated interleukin 6. Interleukin 6 is interleukin 6 is the antigen which increases in response to the inflammation. It is a pro-inflammatory antigen. Next one is elevated lactate dehydrogenase, elevated D-dimer, and elevated ferritin. Elevated D-dimer indicates that there are a number of clots and thrombus are forming in the blood and breaking down. Fibrinogen level is increasing, and similarly, it will also increase ferritin as a result. There are chest X-rays also which we can conduct, in which we will find out ground glass opacity in the lungs. Ground glass opacity is non-transparency through the lungs. Then the CT scan, ground glass opacity plus crazy paving pattern. Crazy paving pattern is ground glass opacity with superimposed inter and intraocular septal thickening of the lung. So septal thickening will be there, inter or intralobular. Then the consolidation with air bronchogram. Consolidation with air bronchogram means the bronchi will be filled with airs, bronchioles will be filled with airs, but the appearance will be white and it looks like tubular. That is called consolidation with air bronchogram. Then the ultrasound will reveal increased B lines. The picture is showing these B lines, white lines, straight lines in the ultrasound. These are the B lines. And lung consolidation with air bronchograms in ultrasound. Thank you so much. This was my topic.
Thank you, Ms. Kusum Roy, for such a detailed explanation about the diagnosis of the COVID-19. And you have told very well about how to collect the specimen and at what temperature we have to maintain it. So now, without further delay, we will move further with the discussion. So for that, I may now, before going further, I would like to first request all the participants that in between you are presenting your own mobile or whatever. So it is causing the hindrance in the presenting of the slides. So please don't disturb the presenter because we are not able to see the slides in between also. So thank you for your cooperation. So I may now call upon Mr. Robin J. Bhatti for elaborating about the management of COVID-19. So Mr. Robin had pursued his master's in nursing and is specialized in medical surgical nursing from HNBG University, Uttarakhand. And he has also pursued MBA Hospital Administration from Swami Vivekanand Bharati University. He has the total experience of 11 years of rich experience in the nursing education, research and the clinical area, and he is also an internal quality auditor allied Boston. He has worked with leading universities in the country and also examiner and the core committee member in different center and state government universities. He has worked with Max Hospitals as head of the Department for Nursing Training, and he has organized various fully funded workshops, that national as well as international, and training in universities and hospitals. He was a sponsored candidate for completing the internal auditor course from Allied Boston, and he got sponsored training in JCI accreditation from BD India. Sir, you can proceed further with the presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. For my part now, I am going to present the management of COVID-19. So, everybody is aware what is COVID-19 now. Is my slide visible to everyone?
Sir, not yet. Now is it visible?
Okay. For the management of COVID-19. So everybody is quite aware what is the management of COVID-19, but I'm going to discuss about the symptomatic treatments and the management of COVID-19 according to the symptoms. So I've divided according to WHO and the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. The symptomatic treatment is First one is management of mild cases. Second one, management of moderate cases. Third one, management of severe cases. Fourth, management of hypoxemic respiratory failure and ARDS. Management of septic shock management. The first one is management of mild cases. So mild cases which are commonly found in our community, and it is very much prevalent in the prone and the red zone areas. In the containment phase, patients with suspected or confirmed mild COVID-19 are being isolated to break the chain. And we can control the COVID-19. So that's why India was in the initial stage able to control this COVID-19. But after the lockdown, it has gone too far. Patients with mild disease may present to primary care department or detected during community outreach activities or home visit or by telemedicine. So it can be easily detected from door-to-door and telemedicine. First referral unit, community health centers, sub-districts, and this at home, which is being the most common thing nowadays being going on. We can quarantine the patients who are having the mild symptoms. And the link I have presented over here, you can get the reference from this link. Next is for the children, to find out the children are presenting with the symptoms of COVID-19, because a small child is very difficult to explain his symptoms or her symptoms. So caregiver of children with mild COVID-19 should monitor for signs and symptoms of clinical deterioration. So parents should be very much vigilant, and they can find out what symptoms are present in their child, which may include, which I have highlighted as well, breathing fast or shallow for infants, grunting, inability to breastfeed, blue lips or face, chest pain or pressure is very common, new confusion, inability to awaken, not interacting when awake, inability to drink or keep down any liquids. So it is very difficult for a child to even swallow the liquid in this condition. So these children can be easily found out by the parents if the monitor is being done by their parents. Next one, patients with suspected or confirmed moderate COVID-19 or pneumonia is to be isolated to contain virus transmission. So patients with moderate disease may present to an emergency unit or an outreach department, and such as they can be home quarantine also, and which can be other times managed through telemedicine. For next one is oxygen support. For moderate cases, oxygen support. So we should target on saturation of 92 to 96% and the patient saturation of 2. So the clinical therapist and the nursing officers can focus on this, that they should maintain and they should see that 92 and 96 is the targeting oxygen 92, and it should be maintained above that. The device for administering the oxygen should be nasal prongs in this COVID-19. Why it is nasal prongs? So that the high flow oxygen can be provided. Or we can use the mask with breathing and non-breathing reservoir bags, depending upon the increasing requirement of oxygen therapy. So I told you HFNC or simple nasal cannulas or high frequency nasal cannulas can be used. N95 can be applied over to it. We can apply N95 over the face of the patient who is with the therapy of FNC. Awake proning may be used in a rescue therapy. So awake proning, this is coming up for the past 3 months. Awake proning, as everybody is aware, every country is getting short of ventilators. So awake proning is a method where we can prevent the patient from losing their life by changing their position to a prone position and preventing the external ventilation. This position can be maintained for 16 hours and it can be helpful till the ventilator is provided. Okay, so next one is all patients should have daily 12-lead ECG, which will help the cardiac patients to rule out whether the symptoms are progressing and they are deteriorating. And also follow the CPR. We should not follow the mouth-to-mouth CPR, rather we can use the bag and mask ventilation. Next one is anticoagulation. A prophylactic dose for anticoagulation is UFH and LMH WH. Example is enoxaparin 40 mg per day subcutaneous. This is being given by WHO, this dose. Control of comorbid condition and monitor for increase of breathing, use of accessory muscles. So increase of breathing can be monitored, like if the accessory muscles are being used more, that means the patient is having a increased respiratory load. Hemodynamic instability, increase in oxygen requirement if any of the above occurs. Shift to dedicated COVID hospital. If the patient is having this type of symptoms and the patient is deteriorating, we should shift the patient to a dedicated COVID hospital rather than a private facility which is not able and not efficient with the high-line treatments. For management of severe cases, early supportive therapy and monitoring is the key. Management of hypoxemic respiratory failure and ARDS, and management of septic shock and other therapeutic management are necessary. Okay, about the early supportive therapy and monitoring. Recognize septic shock in adults with infections and infection is suspected or confirmed. And vasopressors are needed to maintain an arterial pressure of more than equal to 65 mm of Hg. So we can maintain a arterial pressure above 65 mm of Hg, and if the patient is not able to maintain, that means an early supportive therapy. We should also focus on the infants. If the infants are having bradycardia, tachycardia, or change in the mental status, it should be immediately reported to the physician. And if also a prolonged capillary refill time more than 2 seconds is reported, they should be taken an immediate care. Warm vasodilation with bounding pulse, tachypnea, mottling skin, or pettling or purpuric rash, increase lactate, oliguria, hyperthermia or hypothermia is presented in children, then they should be taken care by the pediatrician who is taking care of that COVID area. That's all for my part. I hope this presentation of management is knowledgeable and it will add to your value. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robin.
Madam Rebecca, up to you.
For highlighting the very important aspects in dealing and managing the COVID-19, which is the utmost important challenge in the current scenario. So for the next session, I warmly welcome our respected speaker, Ms. Kumkum Ghosh, and I extend the heartfelt thanks to Ms. Kumkum, who has humbly agreed and accepted our request to enlighten us all with her immense knowledge and her rich experiences and sensitize us all on the COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Kumkum Ghosh is Patron and Deputy General Manager in Nursing Education and Quality, PAN Max Healthcare Limited. Ms. Kumkum has pursued post-basic BSc Nursing in 2003 and MSc Nursing in Cardiology CTBS in 2006. She has also got Cardiovascular Thoracic Diploma from Birla Heart Research Hospital, Kolkata in 1999. She has both clinical and teaching experiences to her credit. In clinical settings, she has worked as staff nurse, MRI, Calcutta, and AIMS. In the nursing education field, she has been the lecturer in Army College of Nursing Jalandhar. Then she worked as nurse educator in the Fortis Hospital Mohali. She worked as vice principal, School of Nursing, Sharda University, Greater Noida. She was the nursing superintendent in the National Heart Institute. She has also worked as the nursing faculty in Dharmshila Hospital and Research Center, where she worked as co-coordinator of oncology nursing program. And Ms. Kumkum has attended various national and international nursing conferences, seminars so far, and organized various extracurricular activities during her faculty tenure at various institutes. Besides this, she is American Heart Association authorized BLS and ACLS trainer. So I would like to welcome Ms. Kumkum Ghosh to further enlighten us with the discussion on the effects and the association of diabetes and hypertension on COVID-19.
Thank you, Rebecca, for those awards. And I really, first I like to thank you all to organize this webinar, which is the need of the hour. Okay, I will just start my presentation, which is regarding the hypertension and diabetes in this COVID-19. So is it visible? Whether my screen is visible? My screen is visible?
We are not able to see the slides, ma'am.
You are not able to see? Let me just try.
Yes.
Is it visible? Is it visible?
Only the screen, but not the slide. Slides are not visible.
Not visible?
No, ma'am.
Can you see now? Can you see?
Not yet, ma'am.
Yeah, present now only. I just clicked.
Ma'am,
But,
you have to
it is
click
not
on
coming.
present now.
That
Window will open.
let
On
me
that
just-
screen. Yes, ma'am.
entire screen? Entire screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it visible now?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Sorry for the interruption.
No problem, ma'am. No issue.
Ma'am, you can select a window. After present now, a window.
Yeah, that window is already entire screen. It has come.
Okay, but it is not visible to us. Hello,
Yes.
sir.
Ma'am, we can see you.
Now?
Yes, ma'am. Now it is
Visible?
open. Yes, ma'am. It is opening.
Okay.
Yeah. We are able to see now, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, now the definition of the case, I do not want to go further because my previous speakers, they have already explained a lot, and I just like to thank them because they have explained pathophysiology and everything very clearly. So directly, I would like to go to the COVID and this hypertension and diabetes. So as we know that this comorbid condition, when we talk about any of the comorbid condition, if the patient's year, the age of the patient is more, if the patient is 60 years or more, if the patient is already having hypertension or diabetes mellitus and any other immunocompromised disease, they are more prone to get the infection. Even it can be a lung disease, it can be a liver kidney disease, it can be a cerebrovascular disease, or even it can be obesity of the patient. Now, mainly the signs and symptoms where the older people and the immunosuppressed patients, in particular patients we see, they can have fatigue, they can have reduced alertness, they can have reduced mobility, diarrhea, loss of appetite, delirium, absence of fever. These all can also you can see with the patient, those who are increased age group. So when we are talking about, so we have some evidences. We have to, whenever we discuss anything, we have to see what the evidence tells. So if we see some evidence which is already, I have already shared in this slide. There one of the study, which this study was done in China, and they have already mentioned that diabetes is a risk factor for hospitalization and mortality of the COVID-19 infection. So diabetes was a comorbidity in 22 to 32%. So non-survivors in a study of 52 intensive care patients. So this is a huge number where we have to really think about why this already is happening. Another study also tells, you can see that 173 patients with a severe disease where the 16.2% had diabetes. And in further study of 140 hospitalized patients where the 12% had diabetes. When compared the intensive care and non-intensive care patients with COVID-19, it appears that it is a twofold when it is an intensive care patients, and the incidence of the patient in intensive care having the diabetes. And the mortality seems to be about threefold higher in the people with diabetes as compared to the general mortality in COVID-19. It was also seen in China. There are different studies. There are 3 studies which is already I have mentioned in this particular slide. It is showing this particular scenario or the data. The number of comorbidities is a predictor of mortality of COVID-19. In addition to the diabetes, the other common comorbidities were hypertension, and about 20% of the cases cardiovascular disease, that is 16%, and the lung disease is the 6%. So you can see that about that all death or the all very high risk factor where these all disease factors are already giving some amount of very big amount where we have to be very, very careful. Now, why it is actually happening? When the people with suffering with diabetes, we all know they are the high risk for infection. It is the normal population also. Even a diabetic patient who is already suffering with if we compare with the other group of population, then the diabetes patients increase the risk of infection. So that is the one particular aspect we have to keep in our mind. Diabetes patients have the impaired immune response. Okay, so mainly Amandeep has already cleared our doubt when she has already told about the pathophysiology of the disease. So in diabetes patient, they have the immune response to the infection, both relation to the cytokine profile, to changes in the immune response, even in the T cell and macrophage activation. So this is the very, very important aspect where we have to think about diabetes mellitus patient. They are having the immune response which is compromised already. Now, another risk factor when we are talking about the type 2 diabetes. So when we are talking about type 2 diabetes, you see that patients are mostly obese, and obesity itself is a risk factor for the infection, because what happens, here in the obesity, the secretion of the adipokines and the cytokines like TNF alpha and interferon. So there is a characteristic, a chronic low grade in abdominal obesity. And it may also induce an impaired immune response. So due to that, adipokines and cytokines, TNF alpha and interferon characterize. So there is a low grade in the abdominal obesity, and it may again impair the immune system. So people, those who are having severe abdominal obesity, they also have a mechanical respiratory problem. So due to the abdominal obesity, there is a lung which is not able to again inflate properly, and which again it is a risk with the ventilation and perfusion. So basal section of the lung sections, there is collapse of the alveoli, and which may lead to again pneumonia, and which again lead to the low oxygen saturation of the blood. So again it leads to the pneumonia due to the obesity, due to the collapse of the lung. So obese subjects also have an increased asthma risk. They also may have the increased asthma risk and this obesity, and they will have more symptoms rather than other normal population. So more severe exacerbation, and they will be added more medications and all, which is again it will take time to recover. And in the late diabetic complication, we all know that all these diabetic patients, if they are already suffering with diabetes, they are also compromised renal function. So the renal compromise is also one factor. Second factor, there even you see the lipid profile is already compromised. They have a risk of ischemic heart disease. They have these people also making the severity of this disease is also increasing for this diabetes patient. So some of the studies, again, I have seen, they are telling for those type of patients, if you are doing the glycemic control, because their glycemic control is within normal limit. So it is not within normal limit, it is out of limit. So infections again it caused due to the poor glycemic control. So if it is a glycemic control can be in the optimal level, so it needs more frequent requirement of the monitoring and the continuous change in the anti-diabetic treatment after the measured glucose levels. So that is one aspect. Second aspect, there are certain medications like glucagon like peptide 1, like GLP-1 receptor. So these medicines are also helpful for this type of patients, and they can able to take this patient as per the doctor's advice. And these particular medications, they are working with the exercise and diet, and they are already making the HbA1c within normal limit with diet and exercise. So, but in this situation, COVID patient, they will not be able to do any exercise. Obviously, they have to be on diet properly as per the requirement of their regular physiological condition, and we have to also give them the glucagon like peptide 1 receptor agonist. Next, altogether the patient with diabetics are high risk and complicated group of patients for the COVID-19 with an increased requirement for hospitalization. Yes, they require hospitalization. They need to be hospitalized, otherwise they will not be taken care at home, because with all this compromised heart and kidney function, they cannot be managed at home. So patient with diabetes need the intensive attention, reduce the risk of other fatalities. And patient with diabetes should follow the general prevention and advice which is given by their diabetologist or the endocrinologist. when they are, and if they are under the respiratory therapy, even the either diabetologist or the endocrinologist has to be referred to take care of their this parameter. Now next area is the hypertension. So again, hypertension, when we think about, mostly if the older age group, we see that two-thirds of the population above 60 years of age, they are suffering with hypertension. Okay, and aging, again, it causes weaker immune system. There's a study which is already happened, and in China they have already done some study. There's the 25 to 50% hospitalized patient who was there, they were having the hypertension, 25 to 50%. So again, so that means these patients, they developed some problems, so they came to hospital and they have to be hospitalized. Even if you see Italy, you see that how many diseased persons are there. Out of that, 76% had high blood pressure. And also it showed that statistic shows that there is an increase of 6% higher chance of death when it is related to the older age group and high blood pressure. Then another relation, again, everyone is talking about that because we know that this COVID-19 virus, SARS-CoV-2, it is going to the ACE2 enzyme, and it is binding with ACE2. Then what is happening? We are getting the infection, and this is already present in the epithelial cells. So now there are patients, those who are on ARBs and ACE inhibitor. So the patient, those who are on ACE inhibitor or ARBs, there is so much of studies are already done, and also there is so much of so many confusion with this, and whether the patient will take ACE inhibitor. If the patient is hypertension, patient will take an ACE inhibitor or ARBs. Now, doctors suggested, and the WHO also suggested, that there was no study which is actually mainly found that it is only done with the hypertension and ACE inhibitor. There was no single study was done with just to see the designatedly whether directly any assessment whether there is a ARB or a ACE inhibitor increase the risk of acquiring COVID-19. There is no such study was done. But after adjustment of the confounders, history of ACE inhibitor or ARB use was found to be associated with increased severity of COVID-19. But there was no specific study actually done on this, only to see ARBs and ACE inhibitor. Now there are certain studies they have started, but till now we do not have any specific reason behind it. So what they suggest to these particular hypertensive patients, they suggest if you are on any hypertensive, antihypertensive drugs, please take this ACE inhibitor. If you are on ACE inhibitor or ARBs, please take this drug, because if you do not take this particular drug, then what will happen? Then again there will be chances of failure, which will again turn into complication when the patient is hospitalized. So it is better to take the drug. Do not, because there are so many patients, they are very, they have the doubt, they are worried ki whether should I take ACE inhibitor, should I take ARBs. But even the ICMR also given the guidelines, if you are on ACE inhibitor, please do not stop the drug, please carry on, because if you stop this drug, because your hypertension will not be actually taken care, and it may land up with some other problem. So actually what happens in the hypertension, mainly what happens when the patient is hypertensive, there is a afterload is increased. So when the afterload is increased, automatically there is a increased, there is a changes in the, there is a resistance in the arteries, and when there is a resistance in the arteries, there is a changes in the intimal layer. and even the arterioles are getting damaged. Now this COVID-19 is a pulmonary infection. Now when the COVID-19 is a pulmonary infection, then due to the poor consistency of the arterioles, if these arterioles are damaged, so there is what is happening, there is a simple leakage of the fluid. It's a fluid infiltrates, it is already in the lung parenchyma. Then what will happen? There is a pulmonary congestion. Now when the pulmonary congestion is there, automatically there is a ventilation perfusion mismatch, and that again lead to the patient is already having the pneumonia and all. So all these things together, it is giving a complication. Now next one is the patient is hypertensive. Automatically we know if the patient is hypertensive, there is a chances of renal impairment. If the renal impairment is already there, again there is a chances of, it is a comorbid condition, again patient is land up with the poor renal function, all the parameters will be increased. And also my previous speaker already told about how the ALT and AST are already increased. So obviously, if the lung is not functioning, if your liver is not functioning, if the arteries is already compromised, this leads to a poor outcome. So mainly hypertension and diabetes, mainly if we look into this all, increased age group, then poor management of the glycemia, and there is a confusion of taking medication and not, these all leading to this poor outcome of this particular COVID-19 for the diabetic and hypertensive patients. But the patients should be given psychological support that if they are having any signs and symptoms, they should not be at home. They should not think about ki I will be all right after some time. They must take care of their medical health as soon as possible, because their increased age and diabetes and hypertension makes the things worst when they go to the hospital. So this is all about my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Kumkum, for the detailed information and rationalizing with the help of the various research evidences and research studies. So now we have reached to the end of the session. So it is a time for discussion round. So the participants can ask the questions. They can put the questions in the chat box. So I've got a few questions. So there is a student who has asked a question. Ms. Amandeep, maybe you can answer it. The question is how to differentiate between normal cough and cold and COVID-19, because most of the signs and symptoms are similar. So it is difficult to say that it is a particular person is having symptom of COVID-19.
Yeah. So as I have already shown in the clinical features, the slide I have shown that most of the symptoms, as you correctly mentioned, it is same as seasonal flu, but there are few symptoms which we can differentiate. Now fever is present in flu or common cold also, and it is present in the COVID-19 infection also, but like dyspnea, like breathing difficulties, or a patient present with fatigue, so too much fatigue. So earlier, if we have fever, we cannot know that we are having COVID infection or we are having a flu or a common cold, just okay. So it actually, if we don't have fever, so we can rule out COVID. 89%, as I have mentioned, 89% of the cases, they had fever. So if a patient like has a cough or any running nose, stuffy nose, so we can say that okay, there is no fever. So fever was presented in 89%. So if the patient is not having fever, we can rule out that it is not COVID-19. Most likely it is not COVID-19. But if there is fever, then and there is which is accompanied by dry cough. So cough also, if it is dry cough, and there is breathing difficulties, there is dyspnea, lots of fatigue. Okay, so I have already explained the spectrum of the disease and the symptoms, all the clinical manifestations. So if it is together, we can suspect it is COVID-19. Yeah, it is difficult to differentiate in the early stages, but maybe with the few days. So if there is fever, you have to now at this point of time, you have to think that it is COVID-19 and you have to take the necessary precaution, because we cannot say with only fever that it is common cold or a flu or a COVID-19 infection. But yes, if there are other symptoms like dry cough, I have mentioned, breathing difficulty, we can be like, we can differentiate. Yeah, this is not common cold. This may be some serious infection.
Okay, thank you. There is one more question. So, is there any chance for reinfection of COVID-19 for the same patient who have treated?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is there a chance for reinfection of the COVID-19 for the same patient who have previously treated?
Okay, so is it for me?
Yeah, you can answer, or anyone from the speakers.
So, like it is seen that the chances of reinfection is less, because the patient who is infected, the body produces antibodies against the virus, and it is seen that it provides protection for the reinfection. So the
Some research study has been going on and some has already been completed. And according to that, if once a person will be infected with COVID-19, then it gives an immunity of 3 months almost to them. So for 3 months they are safe. According to the researchers, there is no claim, but according to the researchers, for 3 months they will get the immunity that they will not be co-infected again.
Okay, from my side, I would like to request Kumkum ma'am to share her views, because Max is the premium healthcare department which is taking care of COVID-19.
Yes, sure.
Kumkum
Yes.
ma'am, please.
Yes, actually, there are studies are going on. Now we cannot conclude that the person who has already suffered with this particular COVID-19 will not have, but till now, conclude any conclusion till now it has not come. Let us hope for that one, the patient gets infected and after that the patient gets immunity, but still now there is no evidences, there is no certain evidences is available regarding that once the patient is already suffered with COVID-19 will not have. Okay, till now it is not, there is no such data is available, because we cannot just confirm ki yes, there are studies are going on. So we can see once the studies will be over, then only we can see ki yes, how the things are happening. So this is the very early stage to tell all this data ki whether it is yes or no.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really informative.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Rebecca,
ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So we have already exceeded with the time, so I will quickly wind up with today's session. So I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our Honorable Nursing Superintendent, ma'am, Ms. Parveen Rani. She is Nursing Superintendent of Maharishi Markandeya Hospital, Maulana Amrana. The most valued invited guests, our participants. I express my gratitude to you that you have taken your time and joined this webinar series, and especially for the guest speakers who have, in a very short span of time, and they have shared their valuable information and the opinion regarding the various aspects of the COVID-19. So we will meet again tomorrow, and I request all the participants to join for the second day session. That is on 19th June 2020 at the same time. It will start at the same time, 2:30 to 3:30. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all. Thank you, team.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, participants, for joining us.